Alfonso Cahero, A Journey into Finance History, Chapter 73, Increased Economic Scrutiny of Big Tech Companies, 2020s. Antitrust and regulatory pressures mount against major tech firms. Once upon a time in the not-so-distant past, there was a revolution. It wasn't a revolution with guns and battles, but with circuits and algorithms. The world witnessed the birth of giants, powerful entities known as big tech companies. They emerged from humble beginnings, garages and dorm rooms with dreams of changing the world. And change it they did. These tech titans were visionaries, fueled by ambition and a desire to push the boundaries of what was possible. They saw the potential of technology to transform lives and societies, and they set out to make their mark. Companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple rose to prominence, each offering a unique vision of the future. In the early days, these tech titans were celebrated as heroes. They brought us wonders beyond imagination. We could connect with friends across oceans, access information at our fingertips, and shop without leaving our homes. Innovation seemed boundless, and the possibilities endless. Google revolutionized how we access information, making the world's knowledge accessible to anyone with an internet connection. Facebook transformed the way we communicate, connecting billions of people around the globe. Amazon redefined the retail experience, offering unparalleled convenience and selection. And Apple enchanted us with sleek gadgets that became indispensable parts of our lives. But as these companies grew, so did their influence. They became more than just providers of services. They became gatekeepers of information and guardians of our digital lives. With great power came great scrutiny, and soon, cracks began to appear in their shiny facade. Privacy concerns emerged as users realized the extent to which their personal data was being collected and monetized. Questions were raised about the impact of social media on mental health and democracy, and accusations of anti-competitive behavior began to swirl as smaller competitors struggled to compete in the shadow of these tech giants. The tech titans amassed vast amounts of data, turning users into commodities to be bought and sold. They knew our likes and dislikes, our habits and desires, better than we knew ourselves. And with this knowledge, they wielded immense control over markets and minds alike. Google's algorithms determined what information we saw, shaping our understanding of the world. Facebook's newsfeed curated our social experiences, influencing our relationships and beliefs. Amazon's recommendation engine guided our purchasing decisions, shaping entire industries in its wake. And Apple's ecosystem locked users into its products, creating a walled garden of digital delights. We marveled at the convenience they offered, the seamless experiences that made our lives easier in so many ways. But as we basked in the glow of our shiny new gadgets and apps, we began to wonder about the cost. What were we giving up in exchange for this convenience, and who was paying the price? As the tech titans grew richer and more powerful, their influence began to permeate every aspect of our lives. They shaped not just how we communicated and consumed, but how we thought and behaved. And as their reach expanded, so too did the risks they posed to competition, innovation, and democracy itself. Amid growing concerns about the power of big tech, calls for regulation grew louder. Politicians, activists, and even some within the industry itself began to question whether these companies had become too big to fail, too powerful to control. And as evidence of their abuses mounted, the battle lines were drawn. Antitrust investigations were launched, hearings were held, and lawsuits were filed. Governments around the world grappled with how best to rein in these tech giants without stifling innovation or undermining the benefits they had brought to society. And as the stakes grew higher, so too did the resistance from those with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. But the tech titans were not content to sit idly by and watch as their empires crumbled. They deployed their considerable resources to influence public opinion, lobby lawmakers, and shape the regulatory landscape in their favor. They argued that they were the engines of innovation, the drivers of progress, and that any attempt to rein them in would only stifle competition and harm consumers. And in many cases, their efforts were successful. Politicians were swayed by promises of jobs and economic growth, while consumers remained largely unaware of the dangers lurking beneath the surface. The tech titans seemed untouchable, their dominance unchallenged, their influence unchecked. But slowly, inexorably, the tide began to turn. As more evidence of their abuses came to light, public opinion began to shift. People started to question whether the conveniences offered by big tech were worth the cost to privacy, democracy, and competition. And as awareness grew, so too did the momentum behind calls for change. Activists mobilized, journalists investigated, and whistleblowers spoke out. They exposed the inner workings of these tech giants, revealing the extent of their power and the lengths to which they would go to protect it. And as the truth came to light, it became clear that something had to be done to rein in these corporate behemoths before it was too late. Around the world, governments began to take action. Antitrust investigations were launched, new regulations were proposed, and fines were levied against those found guilty of abusing their power. From the halls of Washington to the streets of Brussels, the fight against big tech became a rallying cry for politicians and activists alike. But the tech titans were not so easily defeated. They fought back with all the weapons at their disposal, deploying armies of lobbyists, lawyers, and PR experts to defend their interests. They argued that they were the champions of innovation, the engines of progress, and that any attempt to rein them in would only stifle competition and harm consumers. As the battle raged on, the stakes continued to rise. For the tech titans, it was a fight for survival, a struggle to protect their dominance in an increasingly hostile world. For their opponents, it was a quest for justice, a fight to hold these corporate giants accountable for their actions. And as the two sides clashed, the fate of the digital age hung in the balance. But amidst the chaos and confusion, a glimmer of hope emerged. People began to realize that they held the power to shape the future, that their choices and actions could determine whether the tech titans continued to reign supreme or were brought to heel. And as they joined together in solidarity, they formed a movement unlike any the world had ever seen. Governments around the world began to take a more proactive approach to regulating big tech. They introduced new laws designed to curb their power, protect consumers, and promote competition. They imposed fines for anti-competitive behavior, forced companies to divest assets, and even threatened to break them up entirely. But the tech titans were not about to go down without a fight. They launched legal challenges, mounted PR campaigns, and deployed armies of lobbyists to water down or defeat the regulations. They argued that they were the engines of innovation, the drivers of progress, and that any attempt to rein them in would only stifle competition and harm consumers. Despite the tech titans' efforts to sway public opinion and influence policymakers, the tide of public sentiment continued to turn against them. The techlash intensified as more people became aware of the negative impacts of big tech's dominance. Concerns about privacy violations, misinformation, and the stifling of competition grew louder, fueling calls for action. At the same time, whistleblowers and investigative journalists continued to expose the inner workings of these tech giants, revealing shocking abuses of power and breaches of trust. From data scandals to algorithmic bias, the curtain was pulled back on the darker side of Silicon Valley, prompting outrage and demands for accountability. Faced with mounting pressure from both the public and regulators, governments around the world began to take decisive action against big tech. Antitrust investigations were launched, leading to landmark lawsuits and fines against companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon. New regulations were enacted to rein in their power and protect consumers' rights. In the United States, Congress held high-profile hearings, grilling tech executives on their business practices and calling for sweeping reforms. Meanwhile, in Europe, the European Union passed landmark legislation, such as the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, to give individuals more control over their personal data and to hold companies accountable for violations.